like you to bow your heads with me as I pray. Loving Heavenly Father, I thank you so much that despite our unworthiness, you will use us to do the work that you so desperately need done in this world. May you fit us, may you cleanse us, make us able to do that which is so big and so awesome. I pray that you clear my mind and my heart of any pride, of any self-knowledge, that I speak only the words that you give me to speak today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. For some time I was well away. Come in. Well aware I was due to speak this month, and I was very anxious to be able to present prophecy because it's one of my favorite subjects. I have to be careful because I can get very carried away with it, and often my husband, when he's not here, he was going to be here, says to me that it's a proven fact that people that delve into prophecy go mad. That's what's wrong with me. So I've had to be very careful not to get too excited about it. But I have done lots of studies into prophecy, and I find it just so fascinating because it's such a revelation of how God spoke so long ago, and everything is as He said it would be. But when it came time to put the program out, because I have to do the program on Monday for the sub-school to send on to Hilda, I thought, oh, I haven't. It came upon me a little bit sooner than I expected, and I wasn't ready. So I just said a quick prayer. I said, oh Lord, this is my turn. What should I talk on? And I sat there for a few minutes, and then I thought 30 pieces of silver. And afterwards I thought, but that's not prophecy. That's not what I was going to talk about. So to find the text that goes with 30 pieces of silver, went into the swords, e-sword, and I looked for the first verse regarding 30 pieces of silver, and that was our scripture reading. I thought, this is going to be interesting. And so all through the week I was thinking, Lord, really? 30 pieces of silver in slavery? I need to really study into this. And I was blessed to take the whole day off yesterday, and I was reading interestedly, but every now and again I'd see that gem of truth, and it would break my heart. And that's what I wanted to bring to you today. Sorry, I left my notes. So the first question that comes to my mind is, how much is 30 pieces of silver? If we look at that scripture reading and see, well, you know, if a man's ox gores another man, then his ox must die and he must die, because it's life for a life. It's eye for an eye. It's tooth for a tooth. But if it gores his servant, he just has to pay the master of the servant 30 shekels of silver. It's a different value here. And I thought, oh no, this goes against my grain. It's wrong. But I went back to see what comes before that, and I found it's the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, Exodus 20. And after giving the 10 Commandments, God goes on to explain, this is how I want to be worshipped. And He says, don't make any silver and gold statues or ornaments of me or for my worship. And when you come to worship me to make an altar unto me, then make it out of clay. And if you're going to use stones, make sure those stones haven't been cut by human hand, because He wants the worship of Him to be pure. And then the next thing is, on the laws on human behavior, and it's about slavery and masters and women and men, and you're thinking, no, why does that come straight after the Ten Commandments? But you need to put it into context as well. The Israelites had been in Egypt as slaves for nearly 400 years. They had no concept of what a free man was. Now they were free men, and they were being told, right, you're a free man now. And there are differences to how you were when you were a slave. And in his kindness, because they weren't exempt from the world, they were still in the world. But in his kindness, God said, and if a Jewish person is enslaved, and I will go on to that a bit more just now, if a Jewish person is enslaved to you, you have to let him go on the 7th year, because no slavery can last beyond that amongst brother to brother. The reason why I come back to it is because there's many instances where people got themselves into difficulty, either in debt or in some tragedy that's happened, and as a means to surviving, it made good sense to take yourself to a wealthy man and say, I want to be your slave, either to pay my debt or for the protection that will offer me. But it was fine when a Jewish person went to a Jewish person, because you knew that protection would last that 6 years, and then you would be free to then recover yourself as a free man in God. So then I thought I still need to try and work it out, and you know it's really difficult when they're talking about 30 pieces of silver from 1,500 years before Christ, and then that same figure, 30 pieces of silver, is used again at the crucifixion of Christ. And then how would it relate to us 2,000 years down the line in terms of what is that? What is 30 pieces of silver? So I thought, well, I'll go and ask Google. And I found a couple of things, and it was not very clear, not one way or the other, but it's the one says they could have been, depending on the type of coin, it could have been a Ptolemaic tetradaktrum, the name of the coin, which would have been about 13.5 plus minus 1 gram of 25% silver. There are around 31.1035 grams of troy ounce. The spot value of $17 and 6 cents. The closing price on Monday, December 12, 2016 stock exchange value. 30 pieces of silver would, as a silver value, would then be worth 185 to 216 in present day value. It's not, as a silver value, it's worth nothing. I thought to myself, that seems a little bit too low, so I carried on. And there's another one. It says the standard that came to be most commonly used at the time of Athens, or Attic, was the Athenian one or the Attic one, which weighed a little over 4.3 grams. A drachma was approximately a day's pay for a skilled labourer. So 30 pieces of silver, or 30 drachm, at 4 drachm each, would roughly be comparable to 4 months' wages, or 120 days' wages. So I looked up minimum wage for a skilled labourer in this country, and they don't have skilled labourers, they use it on age. So from 25 onward, you must assume the person must be a bit skilled by now. And that minimum wage is £7.83 times 40 hours a week times 4.2, which gives us 1,315 a month times 4 months gives us 5,261. I then thought to myself, back to Jesus' situation, and I thought, well, that 30 pieces of silver that Judas was given ended up buying a potter's field, and so that must be a value that we can buy a field for today. So I went again through Google and had a look at a couple of websites that sell properties, and it seems to be the opening bid on arable land or pasture land is about 5,000 for anything from 10 to 20 acres of land, which would have been a fair size, comparable to maybe the potter's piece of land. So I would say that the 5,000 mark might be relative to the price, the value, as it were, today. And then I thought, well, why was this price, the price determined for Jesus? And it's clear from Exodus 21 that 30 pieces of silver is the price of a slave. Should he die? If a man loses his slave because your ox killed him, you must pay him out the value of the loss of his slave, which is 30 pieces of silver. Now, we might sit back today and say, we don't actually need to deal with slavery today because we're civilized. But it's quite surprising that slavery is very much alive. It just has different names, different faces. I felt quite ill in August. My sister came out from Australia. Her daughter's working up in Birmingham here. And so we all met at my son's house in London and spent the weekend together. And she was telling us she works for a charity that rehabilitates modern day slavery. And she said it actually is making her sick. She can't sleep at nights because the stories that she's dealing with on a daily basis are so horrific. It's too much for her brain and for her emotional capacity to cope with it. And she says it's the psychological damage that is done to a person. You see these websites, and I actually went on them, and I was searching mail order brides and buying children and stuff like that online. I thought the police are going to come knocking on my door because they're going to want to know who I am. But I was just trying to see how easy it is. And mail order brides are easy. And I know people who have mail order brides.
Mail order brides?
Yes. In other words, you know how online brides, you buy them online. Okay, so there was a farmer out in Zimbabwe. He wasn't a very nice man, and he had a wife who left him, and then his son was following his footsteps, also didn't have a nice character. And the next thing, he had the most beautiful woman on his arm, and everyone said he ordered himself a bride from Russia. The next thing, his dad also brought one out, and then his dad said no, it's too much hard work, and he sent her home. And a friend of mine was at the airport when she was boarding to go back to Russia, and she was broken. She was broken, and she was saying, he's given me all the money he paid again as a way of severing the agreement that he had to buy me. But the shame that I've got to go home to my village, to my people, and say, I've been returned. The shame of it. So, she had done nothing wrong. He was just a really nasty man. But I've been in contact with it. And it happens all the time. Right here in Salisbury, there's a chap that lived in the little village where we lived just before we moved, and he's just got himself a typewriter. And we know he's a drug addict. We know that he's a bully, but she won't go home because of the shame that would be attached to that she failed as a bride. So there's many forms of slavery today that exist, and some of it is dark and undercover, and we never get to hear about it. And I know that Spirit of Prophecy says that slavery in the end times will be much worse than it has ever been in history past. I decided to have a look and see what it will cost to get a mail order bride, and the starting price is $5,000. Very interesting. That's the starting price. That means it has a variable. It could go up as much as $30,000 depending on any specifics that you require. Now, I'm just wondering, received the price for Jesus?
The priests.
Well, it could be, but they also didn't want it because it was blood money. And they called it, in their words, they called it blood money. I think it's in Matthew. Let's have a look at Matthew 27.
They bought a land.
Sorry?
They bought a land, no?
Yes. So I'm just going to read to you from Matthew 27, well, as far as maybe to 10. And it says, when the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders and the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate the governor, then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that, he was condemned, repented himself and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? See thou to that. Deal with that problem yourself. And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went out and hanged himself. And the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, it is not lawful for us to put them into the treasury, because it is the price of blood. And they're quoting from the law. And they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Wherefore that field was called the field of blood unto this day. Then was it fulfilled that which was spoken of by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel did value, and gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord appointed me. This brings me to another question, because ultimately the potter received the money for the piece of land. So the question is, who's the potter? You go to Zechariah 11, 12 and 13. And here we read, and it was broken, yeah, and it was broken in that day, and so the poor of the flock that waited upon me knew that it was the word of the Lord. And I said unto them, if ye think good, give me my price, and if not, forbear. So they weighed for my price 30 pieces of silver. Now, if I can just give you a little bit of backstory here. Zechariah was actually told by the Lord, there was a flock of sheep that was destined for the slaughter. And trouble got, because the shepherds, there were 3 shepherds there, caring for these sheep. And it troubled the Lord that the shepherds didn't care that those sheep were off to the slaughter. They had no compassion for their sheep. And so he said to Zechariah, make yourself 2 staffs, and go and you shepherd that flock. And so he made himself 2 staffs, and he called the one staff Beauty and the other one he called Balance. And it's all prophetic about how there were leaders over the children of Israel, and they weren't concerned that the children of Israel were destined to the slaughter. And he took these rods and he went, and during the course of the first month, he actually managed to fire all 3 shepherds by showing their failings. And when the sheep, he'd come to the term and the sheep were now taken off to the slaughter, he had finished his job as a shepherd, he defended the flock against wolves and all sorts of bad, and raised them in good pastures. And so he went to the owners of the sheep and he said, okay, if I've done good, if I've done a good job, give me what you think I'm worth. And they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver, because even the owner of the sheep didn't have the compassion or the will to protect the sheep, to feed them well, because they were off to the slaughter anyway. And so they saw him as the shepherd of a slaughter flock. What's that? That's the same as a slave that you pay for a period of time to fulfill a certain task, and when the job's done, that's it. So they thought, this has got to be related to blood money, because it's slaughter flock, etc., and they weighed him out, the price of a slave for his wages. The interesting thing is that this is recorded in Zechariah, and in Matthew it said that the words of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. And I'm wondering, because the Bible doesn't make a mistake, if we are missing similar prophecy from the book of Jeremiah. But in the end, he takes a knife and he cuts beauty in half, the staff. And it was symbolic of the fact that God would break the control of the shepherds had over the flock, and his covenant that he had with Israel. And then it goes on. But the point that I wanted to look at more closely is what the Lord told him. The Lord said to him in verse 13, and the Lord said unto me, cast it, that 30 pieces of silver, to the potter, a goodly price that I was prized of them. In other words, God's saying, 30 pieces of silver, he's saying a goodly price. He's being sarcastic. Yeah, really? 30 pieces of silver? Go and give it to the potter. Now, what happens is Jeremiah doesn't go and give it to the potter. Let's read on and see. And it says, and I took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them to the potter in the house of the Lord. And I cut asunder the other rod. Okay, now, but when he goes to give it to the potter, he does it in the Jewish tithing way, where when you help a widow or an orphan or whatever, you take that money into the temple and you say to the priest, this is for that person. But you cannot take it directly to them, because you receive your reward there and then when the person is then grateful to you directly, and you get your recognition. So God always said, don't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing, and when helping in alms, do it in a manner that nobody knows. So when they were helping charitable situations, they would go into the temple and say to the priests, this is to go to that place. And so this is exactly what Zechariah did, knowing full well that he couldn't go to the potter and say, because then he'd be receiving that recognition as giving him 50 pieces of silver. So he went to the temple and he cast it in there. In other words, he dropped it in the box and said to the priest, that one's for the potter. So the potter got the money. Now when we go back to Jesus' situation, we've just seen the potter got the money. So it becomes really important to understand who's the potter. Why is it duplicated? And I just did a quick Google search, not an Eastwood search to see, and I got 19 verses about the potter, and every one of them says God is the potter, Jesus is the potter. So it's very interesting that that price ends up in God's hands. Now, if we look at establishing exactly who the potter is, I will take you back to Genesis, and it says, and God formed man from the dust of mean to form?
Make, mold.
To mold, to shape. Okay? So he uses his hands and he makes man out of the dust of the earth. What does a potter do?
The same, with the clay.
He's making pots with his hands. So God keeps saying, I'm the potter. I made you from the dust of the earth. And if you look at John, the Gospel of John 1 verse 1 up to 5, it says, the same was in the beginning, no, this is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things that were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in the darkness, and darkness comprehended it not. So the creator of man is the potter. Who is the creator? It's Jesus. And Jesus is now being crucified. The price is paid for him. It goes to the potter's field to fulfill Jesus' mission. What was the field for?
Strangers.
To bury strangers. So I decided to have another look on the internet to see if I could find a little bit more about the potter's field, and what I found there absorbed me with heartache. There are a number of potter's fields in the United States of America, and they're the pauper's graves. And there's a documentary on it, and I watched the whole documentary. They have a system where people who don't have loved ones that can bury them are taken by the state, and things are very different because I then compared that with Britain, America and Britain. And they keep them in refrigerators until they have enough. Then they have what they call the potter's field. And in each state in America they have a potter's field. They take a bulldozer and they dig a huge trench, and then they bring these boxes up from the fridge when there's enough, and they pack them 4 deep in this long trench, and then they use the bulldozer to cover it over. In amongst those, they have babies that have been terminated in the last trimester, stillborns, bodies that have been given to science, and the remains of the bodies, all put into boxes. Sometimes the babies are mixed with the body parts, and they call it a box of tissues because it's just tissue. And they put these boxes in with vagrants and other sundry strange people who had no one to claim them in death. And they pack them in this trench and they cover them up. What was Jesus trying to say to us when that potter's field was bought and he was off to be crucified? Humanity is going to the slaughter. We are living in a very, very sad and terrible time. The documentary I watched, they actually started going to high schools and asking young people to volunteer to come and mourn for a 20-minute period at the unknown person's gravesite. And the students were volunteering to go and carry the boxes out of the vans and pack them in the trench and stand there and say a prayer for them. And the students were saying that it changed their lives. They realized they could end up going to their grave and no one would be interested enough to come and say farewell or commit them to the soil. And I thought to myself, is their blood on our heads? Have we done enough for a dying world? What was Jesus trying to tell us with the potter's field? It's very sad. There are so many lessons that I began to see in the topic that God impressed me to put. I went to go and see what happens in England. In America, someone had asked why these strange people and unwanted babies and everything were buried as opposed to cremated, and they said it's actually cheaper because they use prisoners to carry the boxes, and it's free labour, plenty of land. England doesn't have plenty of land, and so for them the option is actually cremation. So in this country they cremate all the unwanted people, and the ashes are strewn either in the woods or in crematorium gardens or various other places. But it does say that in this country they have a law where a representative from the council, from the bereavement section, will actually attend so that there is someone there. But they do spend a lot of time as well trying to find someone that might know or be connected to the person. There is a lady that has worked in the bereavement section of one of the councils, I didn't say which one, for 20 years. She said when she first joined, they may do 5, and they call them porpoise burials here. I think they call them indecent or something burials in America. Anyway, here they call them porpoise funerals. And they said there would be about 5 a year when this woman started in the bereavement centre. And she said from when she started till now, that has gone up to about 70 or 80. And she said it used to be the odd vagrant who died in a town where no one could be traced back to where he'd originated from, and they couldn't actually identify any relatives. But now, there are a lot of people who are not vagrant. And she gives an example of one lady who, when she died, the hospital called the council and said, we don't know who to notify. The council started doing its investigation, and they found that she'd been a headmistress most of her life. She had got divorced quite early in her marriage. She'd never had any children. She didn't appear to have any remaining living relatives. There was no one to call. How long did she sit in her flat before she died with no one? While we sit here saying we're too busy, I've got things to do. I've got places to go. I've got responsibilities. I've got to go and hand out great controversies and save the world. We can even use good to be an excuse to do good. Jesus' heart, when he was hanging on the cross, was providing for this school teacher in 2018 a place to be buried. An example of what had to be done. Joining the dots. Oh, it also says that they can't give statistics for England or for the UK because there's no requirement for them to record which death was a porpoise death and which one was not. So they can't tell us how many. But the budget went up to 1.7 million over the last 2 years. 90%, the council can admit, 90% were males. 30 pieces of silver is the price of a slave. Jesus submitted himself into the hands of his executioners to be a slave to death. For this reason he came to the earth. He died so that every slave could be bought by him with his blood. We are all slaves to sin. Jesus said, "Take this good news into all the world. I can set you free. I have bought you with a price. I am the potter. You are the clay. I can make you over again till the image pleases me." No piece of pottery is finished until it's been through the fire. If it comes out the other side with defects, it's broken and returned to the earth. Jesus needs you to put yourself in his hands. He will mold you and he will put you through the fires and prove you till you pass the quality test for eternity. Don't love people or things more than him, because you will end up back on the heap of earth. When he has formed his image in you, he can bridge the gap and reach out to this dying world. They will never see Jesus until they see Jesus in you. Let go and let him. Souls perish while we delay. Today, if you hear his voice, harden not your heart.
Amen.
Amen. Shall we sing the closing hymn? Stand. Take my life and let it be.
on your heart was the suffering of others. Help us to understand how much you carry in your heart for a dying world. And don't let us be found guilty of failing in our duty. Lord, go with us now. May your blessing rest upon each one of us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen.